Hey y'all, welcome back to Corax and Coffee Cast. I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
And we here are all about bringing new people into the hobby.
We're all about pushing back hard against the stereotype that board gamers and nerds are asocial beings.
So before we get started, we do want to thank our producer, Keegan King, our editor of all things, Sarah Vasa, and our board game consultant, Ms. Shaw.
So what we want to talk to you today about is where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to the place where we've all been exposed to the wonderful new games that come out every year that are beyond what we all have been playing our entire lives. We're going to try and get beyond just playing Monopoly and chess and checkers and Candyland and expand our horizons a little bit. The problem is, I think that those of us who call ourselves gamers are very quick to just skip over that common foundation. We don't want to talk about these games at all because they're not cool, they're not hip, they lose a street cred. And I think that's a real big mistake because it ends up cutting out people and cutting out where people actually are.
I think, Rick, it's such a part of gamer culture to trash games like Monopoly and chess and Rummikub and checkers and Candyland and a whole host of other games that we're actually going to talk about in this episode, right? It's, if you identify as a gamer, you want to be a member of the in-group, just like in whatever you identify with, you want to be a member of that in-group, right? And as a gamer, they're like, oh, these games are no good. We know better. We have this secret knowledge. And so we trash these games in order to be identified as a member of this particular in-group. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that so many individuals, gamers or not gamers, have actually never played many of these classic games or have not played them in decades or have played them wrong because they were taught by word of mouth and have been taught through house rules, which kind of actually detracted from the games as they were intended.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is you really just can't attack these classic games that everybody knows because that's what we're standing on. That's where we can build from. And if you get rid of it, where are you going to build? To some extent, these games are just cultural literacy. You have to be able to talk intelligently and think intelligently about the games everybody has played, or you don't even know where you go from there. And
as a gamer, if I want to bring a non-gamer into the community and say, hey, I really want you to play, Twilight Imperium or whatever. Most people are not going to have the inclination to play Twilight Imperium right off the bat, right? I just use that as one example. Mm-hmm. As an extreme example, let's be honest.
Sure, yeah.
There are many times that I don't want to play Twilight Imperium for, 10 hours at a time, as much as I love the game. And I've actually not been able to play over the past couple of years because of COVID, unfortunately.
Sure.
But if you go to someone and say, hey, guess what? I have secret knowledge that the games that you like are garbage. Monopoly, Rummikub, Trouble, Parcheesi, Clue, whatever. The list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And I just trash everything that you know and love and say, but you should stick with me because I have this secret knowledge. You should play these games with me because I am in the know. Most people, be it board games or anything else under the sun, are not going to come with you on that.
No.
They're just not. If your message is, oh, the universe that you know is garbage, but stick with me, most people are going to say, screw you. Forget that. I'm not interested. And rightly so.
This doesn't work with anything else. You can't say, oh, Friends is a horrible TV show, but come watch Citizen Kane with me.
Exactly.
You're just going to scare people away.
Right. I think the reality is that so many gamers don't know classic games. Again, they want to be part of that gamer in-group, but for whatever reason, they haven't played classic games in so long. And I think it's critical to know what the classic games are and how to play them and know what they offer to members of the gamer community and non-gamers alike in order to really fully connect with would-be gamers and game enthusiasts.
And honestly, stay in practice.
Yeah.
Actually be in the habit of playing these classic games sometimes. Play them with people who aren't in the in-group. And see if you can be excited about them and how to bring this excitement with you to other games.
Believe it or not, I actually have had a good time playing Monopoly in the past 10 years. And I've been a gamer for 3 times that long plus. I've had a good time playing Risk in the past 6 months. I love the role-playing game aspect of it, right? Like,
Sure.
I fancy myself a general on the field of battle. And I know that, a lot of my enjoyment of the game comes from these conversations that I have with myself inside my own head about fancying myself like Napoleon. Not exactly a role model, but what can you do?
So you can always bring high-level skills to these simpler games and jazz them up a little bit.
Not only high-level skills, but also memories. When I play Risk, and I typically play Risk on my iPad at this point, but when I do play Risk, not only am I playing the game that I'm playing in the moment, but I'm actually remembering very fondly games of Risk that I played when I was 11 years old.
Sure.
And I'm remembering the people that I played with. And part of that is because I have played Risk so many times that I have all these memories to pull from. And also because I've played Risk so many times that I can, I don't have to focus all of my time and attention on the game that I'm playing in the moment.
Right.
I can play the game and also recall all these memories because I happen to know the game of Risk so well at this point.
Some of it is just second nature.
Exactly.
So anyway, today we're going to be talking about some of these classic games and what they can teach us. So we're going to start with Monopoly, first published in 1933. At its heart, it's a game that teaches you about rolling and moving. It teaches you about auctioning. It teaches you about set collection and area control.
I think, gamers love to hate Monopoly. When I go on forums on Reddit or wherever else, there's, I hate Monopoly for this reason, or Monopoly is terrible for this reason, or, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's everywhere. Hate for Monopoly, in particular, is almost ubiquitous.
It's an easy way to be cool.
It's an easy way to be cool, to be part of that in-group, like we've talked about, right?
Oh, I hate the same things you hate, so we're good, right?
Monopoly and Risk, in particular, are easy to hate in the gamer space. I mean, gamers love to hate Risk and Monopoly almost as much as we love playing other games.
Yeah.
Maybe we love to hate these games more than we love playing other games. And this is just the death nail for bringing new people into the hobby. It truly is.
Because you're setting up a minefield for anybody who wants to join this hobby.
You are.
They have to get past your hate for their game.
They do.
Yeah.
And I want to ask, gamers, have you ever played Monopoly by the proper rules? Like, really? Have you really ever played Monopoly by the proper rules? And I'm not saying that Monopoly by the proper rules is a fantastic game.
Sure.
It's not. But what I am saying is that Monopoly by its proper rules is certainly a better game by almost every house rule version of Monopoly.
It's just not fair to judge a game based on rules that you made for it when you were 8.
Right.
They're probably trash rules. And so many of these games, I've looked at the actual rules for them and they're like, oh, okay, that's actually much more interesting than the way I've been playing this.
For many games, house ruling many games, including many modern games, actually does improve games. And again, your mileage may vary depending on individual player preferences and gaming group preferences, and that's totally fine. But the reality is that most classic house rules variants for most classic games do not improve the games.
Right.
Getting $500 when landing on free parking in Monopoly, or eliminating auctioning from Monopoly. Those detract from the experience.
Right. Well, and they're rules that are not made by gamers.
Right.
So they're not tested and weighed. They're just sort of thrown in there. And yeah, they mess up the works.
There's actually a variant of Monopoly called Solar Quest, designed by Val and Brost, and art also by Val and Brost, as first came out in 1983. That was actually self-published at first, I think. But I think maybe now be published by Universal Games. I'm not sure about that. But it's basically Monopoly in space, in our solar system. And I have a soft spot in my heart for this because as a kid and as an adolescent, I played this kind of over summer vacation with my cousins. And as a lover of all things science fiction, I love the idea of flying my spaceship around and landing on Saturn or Jupiter or Uranus or Neptune or wherever and getting money and blah, blah, blah. And I know I just kind of bashed on house rules of Monopoly, but in this version of Monopoly, being Solar Quest, I remember my cousin Chris was like, oh, we have, spaceships that are flying around in space. We have to add, like booster rockets and lasers and pirates and things like that.
I mean, honestly, it seems like a flaw in the base game to not have lasers in space.
Fair, right? So, as a hardcore gamer at this point who loves to play things like Arkwright and On Mars and things like that, I do, believe it or not, I do have a copy of Solar Quest on my shelf that I refuse to get rid of. I haven't played it in a while. I should, but I will never get rid of that game.
And it's a great half a step beyond Monopoly to get somebody to play.
Right.
So let's talk next about Guess Who?
Guess who?
Guess Who?
Who are we guessing about?
The little figures on the flippy thing, rosy cheeks, beards. You played this game, yes?
Fedoras? Yeah, no, I totally have.
It was first published in 1979. At its heart, it's a game that teaches you deduction and observation.
I think that's absolutely right. It does teach deduction and observation. And the reality is that I would not play this game today unless I was just feeling goofy, right?
Yeah.
And if I did play this game, I would certainly try and come up with questions in order to break the game. That would be the game for me, is how do I break this game? Maybe there's a version of Guess Who for adults to make it more interesting. I don't know. I haven't looked into it.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to ask a extremely generic question and just see if it's within the spirit of the rules, and if my opponent would answer it or just kind of roll their eyes and glare and be like, that's not an appropriate question because you're just trying to knock down all of the pieces. I don't know.
I think strategically you're trying to ask the closest to half question you can ask.
Right.
So if you can manage to ask two questions at once, like, does this person have a hat or rosy cheeks? And let me know if either of those are true. You can do a lot better. It can also just be fun to ask kind of subjective questions. Does this person want to speak to the manager? Can be a fun question. You're not going to win playing that way. But yeah, it is a game for younger kids.
I would definitely play this with younger kids. I have 4 nieces and nephews under 5, and I would play this with any of them, or most of them. They're not all quite at Guess Who age, but I think what's great about Guess Who is it challenges their imagination and their sense of curiosity and inquiry, and certainly challenges their working memory skills and their dexterity. So, I mean, why not play this game with a little kid? It's a great way to engage little kids in tactile experiences and, kind of like very basic rules and things like that.
And it's a game that introduces choices to a young player, which is very nice.
Yeah, you actually have a lot of sandbox type choice in Guess Who, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Rummikub. It was first published in 1977. At its heart, it's about set collection and tile placement.
I actually have a lot of fun memories playing Rummikub, especially, again, over summer vacation with my cousins. We'd play a lot of Rummikub on family game nights when we'd all get together. And today, if I were in a particular mood and somebody asked me to play Rummikub again, I absolutely would. I mean, it's familiar to me personally, but it absolutely is a game that can make you think. It's got a lot of indirect player interaction, but in Rummikub, players absolutely do have the ability to screw with their opponents and say, take that, and screw with plans, and players have to make new plans.
It's great to introduce an indirect way to do that.
It is. There's actually a lot of really indirect take that mechanics and associated frustration tolerance involved in Rummikub, even though it is a seemingly simple tile placement game.
That's an essential building block to any sort of gaming, to think about how you're affecting other people on the board.
Well, you'd think, and I am certainly one that enjoys player interaction, but if I'm thinking about a classic game where there is actually really no player interaction that affects other people's gameplay at all, I would actually bring up Yahtzee.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You're totally on your own and in control of your own fate, as much as the dice will let that happen. Anyway, yeah, Yahtzee was first published in 1956. At its heart, it's a roll and write. It's all about pushing your luck. And again, it's set collection, trying to get those 3 of a kind.
I actually remember playing Yahtzee a few times as a kid. And there's actually a period of time back in probably 2016 or 2017 when I was playing Yahtzee on my phone 10 times a night for a few months. Not really sure what the impotence for that was, but it happened.
Sure.
But I'm actually really grateful that it did happen, because that was really the impotence for me to explore the modern roll and write game genre, which is really exploding at this point.
Oh, nice.
And what I love about Yahtzee is it really is... First off, I actually really enjoy Yahtzee. Let's be honest. It's a good time if you're in the right space. But it's a very small step from Yahtzee to modern roll and writes.
Yeah. Once you understand the mechanics for it, you can get right into, say, Lux Eterna, which is basically just a roll the dice and put them in places.
Right.
But it has so much more meat on its scoring system than you got a lot of points.
And Lux Eterna is not a roll and write per se. It's more of a roll and flip in place. It's not a roll and write.
Right.
Because there's just no writing.
Sure.
But Yahtzee really is a template for the genre and for things related to the genre, like Lux Eterna. That being said, I have, because I've enjoyed my time with the Yahtzee, and again, I kind of binged on it on my phone a few years ago.
Uh-huh. It got you into some other games?
It did. I mean, it got me into Cartographers. So Cartographers is this game designed by Jordi Aiden, art by Lucas Ribeiro. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but a 2019 game published by Thunderworks Games, and it's a flip and write. There are a number of cards. It's a flip and write fantasy adventure, and at its core, it's a map drawing game. Mm-hmm. Players compete to earn the most reputation stars over the course of 4 seasons, and each season's players are drawing on their map sheets to earn reputation by carrying out Queen's edicts before each season is over, and the player with the most reputation stars at the end of the game wins. I do want to say they just released Cartographer's Heroes in 2021. Again, published by Thunderworks Games, and it has all new map sheets, all new scoring cards, it has Explorer and new ambush cards, it has unique abilities and things like this. So it's Cartographer's Heroes is not a full-on expansion in that it is completely standalone. It can be played on its own, or it can be mixed with the components of the original game for more variety.
That's always a nice feature.
It is, yeah. And in addition to Cartographers, there's Welcome To, which has a whole series of different decks. Welcome To it's a flip and write game rather than rolling dice. You're flipping cards, and on a sheet of paper, you are trying to create the perfect 1950s neighborhood.
Oh.
Hopefully without all of the patriarchal nonsense of the actual 1950s in the United States. Yeah. Maybe the 1950s neighborhood as it should have been. And could be now in modern gaming, I don't know. But you're constructing houses and pools and fences and things like this. And yeah, so put out by Blue Cocker Games, which actually just released in 2021, Welcome to the Moon, which is this idea of going to the moon and establishing things on the moon, right?
Sure, terraforming on the moon.
Right, there's this colonizer aspect to it, which, do with that what you will, but what is cool about it is that you can play Welcome to the Moon either as a standalone, one-off solo adventure, but it also offers a campaign spanning 8 adventure sheets that you can play.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Getting back onto classic games that we've all heard of, another one of these is Trouble, with the big button on the center that rolled the dice for you. That was fun. It was first published in 1965. At its heart, it's a roll and move, and it's also basically the same as Sorry and Parcheesi.
I mean, they're entirely the same game.
Yeah.
I mean, Parcheesi, which was developed back 1,600 years ago, is actually, I think, the national game of India. I don't know if that's still true. I know it was true at one time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I did have a Trouble game as a kid. I think I got it for my birthday when I was 5 or 6. I think I also got a copy of Aggravation. Maybe that was a different year. I don't know. But I do have fond memories playing both. A family and friends sitting around the table playing these games. I would not play Sorry or Aggravation now unless I were playing with a little kid. Mm-hmm. But I guess my point is buy kids board games. Like, let's be real.
Yes.
Buy sons and daughters and nieces and nephews and grandkids and so on board games. But more importantly, play board games with kids, because I have so many memories playing board games.
And if you didn't have those memories, you may not ever have found the hobby.
I may not have. So let's talk about Trivial Pursuit.
All right.
Published in 1979 for the first time. This is, all about having general knowledge, trivia knowledge, but it also has roll and move components and set collection components.
So this is one game where it's very important to get a current version. A lot of the questions have just not held up well because the facts have changed over time.
Yeah.
There's one question, I think, that asked which of these people has not played Batman? And hilariously, they successfully guessed who the next Batman would be.
Who? That is incredible. Who is that?
I am not very good at Trivial Pursuit, so I do not know. It was just...
I'm going to guess it's Val Kilmer. That's my guess. I bet it came out before Val Kilmer played Batman for Batman Forever, but whatever.
Hey y'all, your friendly producer Keegan here to let you know that it was in fact Ben Affleck who was on the Trivial Pursuit card. Twitter user SE Sinkhorn found a version of Trivial Pursuit from 2008, and the question is, who has never been Batman? Ben Affleck, Christian Bale, George Clooney, Val Kilmer, or Adam West? At the time that card came out, obviously Ben Affleck was the answer, but the part that's more interesting to me is now every single answer is incorrect, which is kind of crazy. That is a 2008 edition of Trivial Pursuit is wrong on the Batman question. Back to these guys.
But it was just so typecast that it was like, oh yeah, this is the next person. So you can have no idea what the correct answer is for this. It reminds me a little of my reading tests in grade school when I did poorly because I read ahead and I answered based on chapter 7 rather than chapter 3.
Yeah, that happens.
And they asked some silly question like, how many friends does the main character have? And it's like, well, by chapter 7, they have a lot more than they did in chapter 3, let me tell you. This is also one of those games where a themed version of the game can do so much better than the original version, assuming that the theme is something that everybody at the table cares about.
I don't think I've actually ever played a non-geeky version of Trivial Pursuit. I remember having Indiana Jones Trivial Pursuit and maybe Star Trek Trivial Pursuit and maybe even Batman Trivial Pursuit. I'm not sure, but I've never played generic Trivial Pursuit.
I just remember having the hardest time filling in the sports category because I didn't know any of it. So I was just guessing a random letter each time and hoping.
Well, you have the knowledge that you have.
Yes. And I have the knowledge that I want mostly, so that's great. Speaking of knowledge, let's talk about Clue. It was first published in 1949. At its heart, it's a game about deduction, and it uses roll and move mechanics.
So much as gamers love to hate on roll and move mechanics, and I'm on that bandwagon. I think 19 times out of 20 roll and move is an outdated mechanic. I certainly do have fond memories of playing Clue with my dad and my sister, and even with my mom and my brother, although they would play less frequently than my sister and my dad when I was a kid. I think, Clue is charming and even enchanting as a theme, made popular by the fictional adventures of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes or Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot, right? It really is. There are these exciting adventures that you can go on. I mean, there's certainly better social deduction games out there at this point. But if somebody asked me to play Clue at this point in my life, I would not say no. I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. And after I play the game, let's check out these other social deduction games and see if you like those. But I would totally play Clue.
I'd also be down for watching the Clue movie. Have you seen this?
I have not seen the Clue movie.
It is slapstick humor the whole time. It's
right. I can get on board with that.
It plays on the sort of ridiculousness of nobody knows who murdered this person. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Well, maybe I'll check it out on iTunes or wherever else. Netflix, I don't know. So let's go to a game that's a little bit harder to like.
Okay.
Let's talk about Candyland.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about Candyland. We're being positive.
I mean, Candyland was first published in 1949. At its heart, it's a draw and move game, or flip and move. You have this deck of cards, and on one side they have a colored square, and that's where you move your piece to, right? There are no dice in Candyland.
Yeah, this is a very simple game, and it introduces kids to the concept of rules and of taking turns. So most adults will quickly get bored of this because it's completely deterministic. I'm pretty sure that once you shuffle the cards the first time, you already know who's going to win. You're just figuring it out. I am reminded, though, of when I was, 7 and my sister was 4, and she desperately wanted to play with me the card game War, which is just, we deal out X number of cards and flip them over, and whoever is higher wins. She must have found comfort in this process, but I already knew that the game was won and lost based on shuffling, and so it's just interesting. It hit for her and it missed for me, and I think Candyland is like that. It's got a sweet spot of ages, but that's probably a pretty narrow sweet spot.
Well, it's not surprising to me that you played War with her, because I know your sister and she generally gets what she wants.
This is true.
Let's talk about life. Not life as an existential thing, but life as a board game.
Oh, good, because I wasn't prepared for that conversation.
Life, the full name being The Game of Life, first published in 1960. And, at its heart, it's a roll and move game, but it's a spin and move game, because you have a spinner rather than dice.
Mm-hmm. So the main choice of life is whether to go to college or not. And after you've made that choice, it's, again, largely deterministic. It kind of also revolves around a theme that its target audience is going to have a hard time relating to. The idea of getting old and making it to the end in good form is something you really don't understand until, later on in life. It does introduce some interesting risk mitigation strategy with that initial choice of, would you rather be 3 turns ahead, or would you rather have the better chance at a better career?
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing to encounter for a young gamer.
I actually found the Game of Life quite compelling. Not mechanically, although I didn't know any better at the time, 30 years ago whenever I first played. Mm-hmm. But I found it compelling because each space has, 4 or 5 or 6 words of text, or 7, whatever it is. And so reading one space of text that deterministically told me what happened to me and my family made me want to read another and another and another, and so on and so forth. So it really was compelling to me in that way, in that I wanted to, consume the content of the entire board and play through the game and see what would happen to me.
That's great.
Again, I think really good for, younger kids and families in that way, because I think there is a lot of content there to be consumed and discovered in seemingly, perhaps, non-deterministic ways, even though it is entirely deterministic.
Sure. I mean, and if that gets you into immersion and role-playing early, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Let's talk about Risk.
Oh, yeah. Risk. The big war game over the entire Earth. First published in 1959. At its heart, it's all about area control. It's about pushing your luck. Set collection and hand management also are somewhat important.
I have probably played 100 games of Risk in my life, either with a board and physical pieces or on, my iPad. But I actually, believe it or not, remember my first game of Risk quite vividly. I was in the 5th grade, and we were having indoor recess because it was horribly rainy outside. I was playing with my friends, Peter and Lynn and Ross and Chiz. And they introduced me to the game. And we would play anytime we had indoor recess because of inclement weather or whatever else. And I remember Peter would always go for the continent of Asia. Ross would typically go for Europe for some reason. And I actually remember asking for my own copy of Risk for Christmas or my birthday or something that year, and getting it from my parents. And I actually think there are some licensed copies of Risk, and we don't need to go into the whole licensed versions of classic board games right now. That's a whole different conversation.
Sure. Yeah, but I got the Lord of the Rings one.
Yeah. I think I have the StarCraft one kicking around somewhere. And some of the licensed versions of classic games, including Risk, actually have some interesting elements to them that modify the rules of the original game in interesting ways that are, I think, not something to stay on for hardcore gamers, but worth exploring to some extent.
Yeah, fortresses are pretty common, like choke points that make certain territories even harder to take. The luck of Risk is just so funny. I just remember several times where I've had way too many people, and this should be a slam dunk, but just troop after troop after troop falls, and it's like a whole army just evaporate.
I think it's worth saying that, now that I've kind of disclosed that I've enjoyed licensed versions of Risk, I'm having this anxiety of, oh my goodness, I'm going to be seen as, a noob or a member of the out group, somebody who's not a true gamer. And I know that's not true, right? Because I have been a hardcore gamer for 30 plus years, and I have played Blitzkrieg and the campaign for North Africa and Starfleet battles intensively, and many, many other extremely crunchy games. And I've also played tic-tac-toe, and certainly not every game in between. Nobody possibly could, but many games in between. And I'm not going to go so far as to call myself an expert in the hobby. I don't even know what that would look like, but I do know that I am an experienced member of the hobby, and I say, oh, I like licensed Risk, or I feel like a member of the outgroup and a noob, just in that admission, which is, I think, part of the problem, which we've already alluded to.
I agree. It feels like a good trade, but it's really not a good trade to get rid of the entire rest of the world for the approval of an in-group that largely probably doesn't care.
Right.
But it is tempting.
But also, I love the community, right? And, part of me craves their approval, whatever that would look like. And, you certainly can't please everybody, and I would never try. It's just, it's an impossible task. But the reason why I share that is because I know, my experience is not isolated. It's not unique. There are many people who think in their own way or feel in their own way that, oh, if I admit I like game X, including classic games, then I won't be taken seriously.
And it means we're not really able to communicate honestly, and that's not helpful for anybody.
Exactly. We can't communicate honestly or genuinely. So in the name of genuine communication, let's talk about BattleShip, first published in 1931. It's a push your luck game. It's a deduction game.
And it's one that I have some fond memories for. I really loved the components of this. It's fun, it's sturdy, it's portable, and it was probably my first foray into getting inside an opponent's head. Where would you have put your ships? And the actual mechanics of it are a bit spreadsheety, but the prospect of exploding my opponent kept my ADD brain on task, which is quite an achievement. And I've gotten some light ribbing on that.
It's another great game for little kids. So it's an important one to know how to play, and not just know about, but like, oh, I know how to play BattleShip. Like play with a 4-year-old or 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or whatever year old, and be like, hey, let's play some BattleShip. Let's go for it.
And get some of that role playing and immersion in there.
Yeah.
Throw in a little bit of trash talk. Need to be careful with the trash talk with 8-year-olds, but
Oh, I'm sure they will trash talk you. I'm going to say trash talk you back, but they'll probably trash talk you whether you trash talk them or not.
Yeah, probably.
And there's my 2 cents on 8-year-olds, but what do I know? I don't have one of my own. Let's talk about Connect 4, first published in 1974. I mean, at its heart, Connect 4 is really an area control game.
Yeah.
And so many of our modern games that we all know and love as gamers, or maybe will love in the future, but don't know yet as non-gamers, are based on area control. This game teaches such a basic skill in board gaming.
Absolutely. So this is a little like tic-tac-toe with the knobs turned up to 11.
Yeah.
It's interesting how gravity decides what moves you're able to make. That's an extra little wrinkle. It's also easier to lose track of what's going on because you have more board to keep track of. People actually win Connect 4, whereas people at high levels of play very rarely win tic-tac-toe.
Or medium levels of play.
Or medium levels of play. There's really not so much of a high level of play because, if you're...
Tic-tac-toe is a solved game.
Yes, exactly.
So let's talk about a game that is decidedly unsolved, although there certainly has been tremendous controversy about the solved or unsolved nature of this game for almost 25 years. But the game dates back much, much further than that, and that is chess.
Oh, yes.
Chess dates back to 1475 CE, and iterations of chess date back much further than that, but 1475 is kind of the commonly accepted date of a reasonable approximation of chess that can be kind of glanced at or seen by the casual passerby as, oh yes, this is an iteration of chess.
Sure.
Just like Connect 4, at its heart, chess is an area control game.
It's an ancient game. It's a complex game. It's got sort of two very different communities, I feel. You've got people who play chess and know how the pieces move, and that's about it. And then you've got a lot of people who memorize and who have memorized entire gambits or openings, and you make your move and like say, oh yeah, that's a pincer movement. I know what to do with that.
Right.
So that makes it a difficult game to kind of come together on, if that makes sense. It's a game where I feel like parts of it have already been solved. And as someone who favors the castle opening, which is not at all optimal, I think that's a bit sad.
I think there are also so many levels of chess that for both you and I, we don't even realize, because there are, chess experts who commit, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousand hours to this game and see sides of this game that we just don't and never will. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the chess community is still flourishing, both online and offline, which is great.
Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a cultural literacy thing.
Oh, yeah.
You have to know how to play chess, at least know how the pieces move. Because a lot of games will just tell you, oh, this piece moves like a rook, and you're just supposed to know that.
At the same time, you mentioned, oh, you have to know how to play this. I'm like, well, do you have to know how to play this? I'm like, you don't, in that you don't have to know how to play chess in order to play many other games. That's not a requirement, right?
Right.
Like, I agree that it is cultural literacy. And at the same time, when I sit down to play chess, even when I'm teaching somebody to play chess, and I have taught people to play chess in the last few years, it's a giant bummer for me. It's not something I want to be doing by and large. And that's a personal preference and a personal choice. I'm not saying it's a horrible game. It's been around for much longer than I have, and it'll be around for...
much longer than you are.
Exactly.
And there are good reasons for that.
There sure are.
But it's not on your top 5 list of games.
It's not on my top 5. It's not on my top 100.
Yeah.
And it never will be. But I do want to mention one book in particular that really brought chess alive for me as a kid, that I still own a copy of and will never get rid of. And that is Every Great Chess Player Was Once a Beginner by Brian Byfield and Alan Orpin, and actually illustrated by Alan Cracknell. Mm-hmm. And this game has been out of print for probably 20 years. It's unfortunate, but you still can get used copies in bookstores and things like that. And it injected this fantasy element into chess, and this excitement and this enchantment and this adventure that really sparked my interest. And, these are not far-fetched for chess, right? Because, chess is really this abstraction of feudal lords battling it out on some green field somewhere between castles, right? That's the whole thing. Nobody should really be ignorant to that.
Exactly.
And I probably crack open this book far more often than I play chess, at least in the last 10 years. I would definitely recommend that book to anyone who thinks chess is just a boring abstraction. I'm like, it's not. There's more to it if you're willing to role play it out.
Nice. It's undoubtedly a great game.
It's undoubtedly a great game, just not one that we happen to love. That's fine. A game that is more abstract than chess is checkers.
Yep.
And it's given a commonly accepted debut date of 1150 CE. And again, just like chess, it is at its heart an area control game.
So checkers is a game with some very simple rules, but a surprising amount of depth that can be found in those rules. Like chess, it's a game where you've been introduced to this idea of threatened actions. It's almost more important what I'm about to do to you than what I've actually done, because my piece can use 2 different threatened actions to affect what you're going to do. But once I commit to one, I'm only in one place, so I can't threaten you that other place. It's an early place where people start to learn that and learn about sort of indirect play.
I haven't played checkers in years and years and years, but if somebody, busted out a checkerboard and said, "Hey, Pete, let's play checkers," immediately my first reaction would be, "Oh gosh, there's so many other games that I'd rather play." However, I would say yes. I would say yes, let's play checkers, and maybe play a second game of checkers, and maybe I would learn something, and then I would want to introduce them to something else. If we're going to mention chess and we're going to mention checkers, I feel like we have to mention Backgammon. And I know maybe from a historical point of view, it's kind of absurd to lump chess, checkers, and Backgammon together.
But when we were taught these games,
it's kind of this anachronistic fashion.
they use some similar pieces, so they get lumped in together.
Right, exactly.
It's easy to make a set of 3 that has all 3 in them. So that's probably why we tend to lump them together.
Yeah.
So yeah, Backgammon, people figure it was brought into being in its current form in about 3000 BCE. So it is an ancient game. At its heart, it's a roll and move game, and it's also about area control. And I know it's a favorite of yours.
It is, of kind of the classic abstract games, and I know we kind of lump Clue and Parcheesi together with chess and checkers and Backgammon, which is really, really bizarre because some of these games are so much older and have more staying power than, the quote classic, unquote games of the 1900s.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a huge difference between 1950s classic and, older than dirt classic.
Right, yeah. But, what's really funny is that even among, chess and checkers and Backgammon who are lumped together, it's like, well, if Backgammon is, a middle-aged adult, then chess and checkers are really just children, according to history. Mm-hmm. But I digress. I do really enjoy Backgammon. I played Backgammon a lot with my dad when I was, 7, 8, 9, 10. But the reason why it's really near and dear to my heart is that Backgammon, at least to my memory, is the first game where I was able to think about, developmentally appropriate, in-depth strategy and tactics and discuss them with my dad and with a couple other people. I'm not a competitive Backgammon player then or now, but I do have a set that I will bust out on occasion, and I will teach it to people on occasion and actually really, really enjoy.
So this was your way into metagaming.
It really was, actually, yes, exactly.
Nice. Moving on from an ancient game to one that's quite a bit newer. Let's talk about Settlers of Catan.
Yeah, so we've been talking about all of these classic games that many people grew up with, and many people grew up with who are non-gamers or before they were gamers, played or at least heard of to one extent or another. But Settlers of Catan is a game that is typically played by people who are slightly older. An 8-year-old could play Settlers, but it's typically played by people who are 10, 12, 14, 16, or, 80.
Right, yes.
And it's typically known as kind of a classic gateway game, one of those games that bridges the gap between these classic family games and games that we think about as gamer games, as being part of the community or hobby or whatnot.
So this one was published by Cosmos in 1995, but it still feels fresh for at least people of my generation. The full name of it is The Settlers of Catan, but it's often known as either Catan or simply Settlers.
What I love about Settlers, and I've played lots of Settlers, both before I really got full on into the hobby and after I got full on into the hobby, we think about Settlers as being far off the beaten path from many of the classic games that we just talked about. Right? Mm-hmm. But Settlers employs set collection and hand management mechanics just in very similar ways to how Rummikub does, and many of the other games we've talked about.
Right. But it introduces a game board and an actual world to be in.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the next step forward.
I think it's incredible how many game mechanics are in Settlers in bite-sized pieces.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it teaches you about hand management. It has roll and move in there for the robber. It's about area control. It's got some social negotiation in there, some bluffing, some civilization building. It's got a modular board setup. It's got several expansions. It teaches you a bit about game systems, and it's got multiple editions. So it's a big step forward into the deep end of the pool, as it were.
Right. And once you play a few classic games with your friends who are not gamers and then introduce them to Settlers of Catan, and maybe they already know it, then you can kind of extract them. It's like, oh, what did you like about this game? Did you like the area control or the social negotiation? You don't have to really ask them because, again, they might not be interested in talking about the meta, but just observe them. What do they get excited about? Because it's so easy in Catan to break down these mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of these knowledge and skills in Catan can be transferred to other games.
And sometimes you get people into these situations and they start talking to you about the game and they don't necessarily have the vocabulary for it.
Right.
But the desire to talk to you about it is the start, really.
I think it's also important to not see this as just a means to an end, right? Like we've talked about, you can really enjoy Risk. You can really enjoy Rummikub or Clue, or you enjoy what you enjoy, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But if you play Settlers with the right group of people, it can actually really be an incredibly satisfying, immersive experience.
Mm-hmm.
That includes, social negotiation and treachery and cunning and backstabbing in really in-depth ways. And again, those, elements are certainly not for all people, and I get that.
Right.
I constantly hear or read gamers in the forum saying, oh, I played Catan with people, but, then they said they wanted more. And that's fair. There are plenty of Civilization games that are far more immersive and more in-depth than Catan, and they exist for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I love those games. Those games is where I live and where I want to be. But what's great about Catan, for me at least, is that, again, like Risk, because I've played it so many times, I can kind of inject this role-playing game aspect into it for me,
mm-hmm.
and kind of play the game with part of my brain while also really encouraging non-gamers or would-be gamers to experience new things and kind of bring them along and really enjoy the experience. I think that's critical because people will know if you're not enjoying the experience and just trying to get them from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But if you're really enjoying being with them, that's the point, right? That's the whole point of what we do. You'll be more likely to get them to come along and try some of these more immersive games, more crunchy games.
Right.
Like Civilization or whatever, whatever it is. Clash of Cultures.
And it is on its own a deep enough game where you're not going to get bored of playing it after the 10th time. So yeah, it's a fantastic game.
So we really do and hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you got something out of seeing that there actually is some life in classic games or ways of viewing classic games that have value, either by playing them with certain demographics or by playing them in a certain way, experiencing them in the ways that maybe you haven't experienced them before. And we really do believe that denying experience with classic games or knowledge of classic games is really a detriment to the hobby, both for people in the hobby and for people who would like to enter the hobby.
And we can't decide, okay, we have enough people, we don't need any more.
Exactly.
That's how we end up killing the hobby.
Right. And it's really easy to say, oh, XYZ game is no good, right? We have ABC game that is so much better, right? We have Twilight Imperium, we have Clash of Cultures, what have you, right? Well, we only have those games because those games sit and stand on the shoulders of giants that have had so much staying power.
Exactly. And because they don't have to explain every single rule and every single mechanic and every single skill, because you've already learned this in these classic games.
Right. So thanks so much for listening. Hopefully this was not too soapboxy. In the next episode, we're actually going to be doing a deep dive on some very specific and crunchy games that the Corax and Coffee team has enjoyed of late.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be really good, I hope. So please do consider supporting our podcast. You can go on Patreon and subscribe in whatever amount you think our content is worth. You can go check out our merch store. You can pledge to our podcast or whatever else you want to do.
You can check out all the content we have for you on our website at www.coraxandcoffee.com.
But keep in mind that the vast majority of our content is absolutely free to all, and we hope to keep it that way. And the best way to keep it that way is supporting the channel. Until next time, I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
Take care, all.
Take care.
Some episodes really pull the old nostalgia strings and play you like a fiddle. This is not one of those episodes for me because my little brother wouldn't play games with me, but it's okay. Anyway, rather than playing up my Dickensian childhood, let's go ahead and thank you all for listening to the Corax and Coffee Cast with the Butch and Sundance of board gaming, Pete Steele and Rick Hendricks. Music, audio engineering, and overselling their skills by me, Keegan King. Thanks to everyone who helps make this possible and makes my life just a little bit harder. If you like this podcast, then you might need to see a professional. Not like a doctor. Just a fancy business person would be fine. While you two are chatting, you could talk about finding more of our content on coraxandcoffee.com, where you'll find written game reviews, unboxing videos, and print and play content, or whatever else we come up with. Follow us on social media, or if you'd like to support us, you can find us on Patreon or in the Anchor link in the show notes. However, this podcast will remain free whether you support us or not, but if you would like to support us and can't really help us financially, that's okay. You could also subscribe, like our videos, like our podcasts, and comment helps us out a ton. Rating us on Apple especially is helpful. The quote of the week: I say creepy is just another label we use to distance ourselves from what we don't understand. Or that it reminds us of something in ourselves we're just not comfortable with. It just ain't a real thing, you know? Unless you choose to believe it. Corax and Coffee. Tabletop gaming. Caffeinated.